gentlemen, first of all, I have to apologize not to speak Lithuanian to you, but my Lithuanian language skills are far away from being good enough for a scientific presentation. That's the first apologize. The second is the invitation was written that presentations can be made in English, Russian, Lithuanian, and German language. But there is no translator from German. So, of course, I'm prepared in German. And today, I decided to speak to you in English. So I will be my own translator with all the mistakes that are possible here. And that means with a lot of changes and maybe a lot of mistakes, language mistakes, but I hope no scientific mistakes. I will not speak about Karl von Hagen, as you know, but I haven't prepared anything that you can see. I'm just speaking. And the science of the history of libraries today is much more than just datas, persons, and facts. Library history today is a discipline that is interdisciplinary and part of the cultural history. The most familiar subject of the discipline connected with the history of libraries is the history of books, of course. Books are the core element of every library. That means the handwritten and the printed book, of course. And as far as they are old prints, and of course, especially handwritten books, every book is an individual. Every book is an individual. It is an individual not just because of its cover. It's especially an individual because of its internal structure. Starting with ex libris and handwritten notes of the owners, with its traces of users, that means marginal notes or underlinings or other comments, up to traces that shows a lot about the fate of the book. That means, for example, fire, traces of fire, traces of wrong storage. All these things, or a recovering of the book, make every old print an individual. What is more, especially convolutes, the structure, the organization, the role of the prints make every convolute individual. You will never find the same convolute in the European library. One of the main themes today in the history of libraries and books is the migration of books. The migration of books. As far as all of us knows, books and collections, whole collections, have been not just destroyed, but they have been transferred. It starts with Alexandria, the destruction, and ends, everybody will know, with Herzogin Anna Amalia Library in Weimar. The fire destroyed a lot of unique books. As far as I can see at this moment, there are two main scientific approaches in library history and book history. One approach is by German, the concept of a living library. That means a library as an organism. It's an idea of epochos. The library as an organism And each new book changes the structure and, let's say, the body of the library. And we have to look at the content of each book. Living library is one concept. And the other is introduced mainly by the French colleague Roger Chartier, the histoire des livres, the history of books. That means, in this case, the history of a reader. The main question of this approach is, what are the readers doing with their reading? What are they doing with the reading? And therefore, every marginal note, every comment on a book is important to reconstruct the genesis, we can say, of the work, the poetic, the scientific work of every scientist. But what can we do if we do not have the books anymore? What can we do if there are no books? If we have lost our core element? As far as I've said before, history of library is a history of losses, of indispensable losses. In former times, and we discussed it this morning already, in former times every priest in the province, we know it from, first of all, French studies, owns a small library. Every priest owns a Bible. Every priest owns a private temple. And every priest owns a collection of sermons. Yeah? Postilla. That means the small library is a library for the use, for the duties of a priest. What priests have to fulfill. As far as we know, there are no public libraries in Parengė. There are no public libraries around Parengė. So one of the main questions is, where a reader like Donelaitis can find his sources? We have heard today of Thomas Kauner's try about reconstruction of Donelaitis' library. Yeah? But how can Donelaitis get access to the books? As far as you know, he never visited again Königsberg after 1740, with one exception for a private stay there. But on the other hand, Donelaitis spent nearly 10 years in Königsberg, as we all know, from 1731 to 1740, as a young pupil, as a student. That means Königsberg was a place of his learned education and his intellectual socialization. And if you compare this one decade in Königsberg, was followed by nearly 4 decades in the province, working as a priest. So, this 10 years in Königsberg must have been very, very influential on the priest-poet Donelaitis. The idea of this small presentation is to imagine Kristijonas Donelaitis as a potential reader in Königsberg libraries. The idea is, what could have been his possibilities to read? Where can he find books? Where can he find books? But, to say it right at the beginning, this attempt, of course, is fragmentary, and this attempt cannot be successful. Because, especially the research on the Königsberg, on the history of the Königsberg libraries, is burdened with a deficit. Because this landscape does not exist anymore. The books, the collections are largely destroyed. The rest is distributed on more than 20-25 libraries all around Europe. Most of them, half of these books, are today in Russia, and it's not easy to get access to these books anymore. No other regional library landscape has been so lasting, so largely destroyed as the Königsberg. And that is for the Lithuanian cultural research as well as for the German cultural research a catastrophe. You know it, as Lithuanians, of course, that after 1945, directly after the fall of Königsberg, after the capitulation, a group of Lithuanian experts, Lithuanian Academy of Sciences, were traveling to Königsberg and around Königsberg, and they were looking for books and hand or manuscripts that are connected with the Lithuanian culture. And there were no other place in whole Europe where you can find more books from Lithuanian authors about Lithuanian culture than in Königsberg until 1945. The first article, by the way, in Germany, for example, we do not know anything about the fate of Königsberg libraries until the 1980s. In Lithuania, the first article about it was a Lithuanian article. The first article ever written about what happens to Königsberg books was a Lithuanian article written by Andrius Kulota in 1964. And the title of this article shows the importance, the role of Königsberg for the Lithuanian cultural history. It is ten kur buvo surastas medu rankraštis. But back to the Königsberg. What can the science of book and library history do if the subject of desire are not existing anymore? What can we do? In such cases, it is a real stroke of luck, if we have catalogs of this time, if we have catalogs about these collections. One example how important these catalogs are, not just for Königsberg libraries, but for all libraries in the world, is an example from Vilnius. At Vilnius University Library, we have a project supported by RMT since the beginning of this year to reconstruct the oldest collection of Vilnius Library. And the basis for this project is the handwritten catalog from around 1770. We all know that also Vilnius Library, the old library of Vilnius, does not exist anymore. We do not know where these books are. And these books that are back today are brought back, a lot of them have been brought back after 1945. And they are not the old collection. So our only source for the old collection is also in Vilnius, a catalog. Catalogs, as Paul Cakeman has said, are the books of the books. If we do not have the books anymore, we should pray and hope to find catalogs. And we have also catalogs from all Königsberg libraries. Catalogs that have been written during the lifetime of Donelaitis. At the beginning of 1758, the Russian troops occupied Königsberg. And one of the first commands of the new administration was that all Königsberg libraries should prepare catalogs of their books. The idea was, let's say, a typical Russian way of book acquisition, to get books from Königsberg libraries for the Library of the Academy of Science in Petersburg. That is what happens in 1832 in Vilnius, and what happens in 1945 in parts of Germany and other parts of Europe. Yeah? You know, until today there are millions of books in Russian libraries that are not catalogued, yeah? That are never used since 1945. So, during the 7 Years' War, the attempt failed. The books were not transferred to Petersburg, but we are in the lucky situation to have these catalogs from 1758, and these catalogs are in the Historical State Archive in Moscow. And 50 years ago, it was possible to get microfilm copies of these catalogs. We have it now in Osnabrück. Today, we will have not the chance to get them anymore. If we look at these catalogs, there are 5 libraries described. First one, the biggest one, is the Palace Library. Palace Library, or Schlossbibliothek, is a library that is going back to the days of Herzog or Duke Albrecht of Brandenburg-Ansbach. First library in Königsberg. Albrecht founded 2 libraries, the so-called German or Kammerbibliothek, Chamber Library, and the Palace Library. After his death, both libraries were united. And for the next 200 years, this Palace Library became the richest library in Königsberg. The richest library means it also has a lot of money for book acquisition, and it was a library that was especially rich on prints from printing places outside Germany. They can afford it. 1758, the Russian catalogue noted more than 10,000 books in this library. More than 10,000 books. The second library is the University Library. It was also founded by Duke Albrecht, together with the University of Königsberg in 1544. But until today, we do not have any history of the European university libraries. The university libraries of Europe are having a, let's say, shadow existence during the whole early modern period, especially the Lutheran libraries. They are, let's say, very poor libraries. Mainly they get the prints of the members of one academy. They are rich in dissertations, disputations. They are rich in poetry, yeah, and small prints. But they do not have any, let's say, not enough money to buy a lot of things. To compare it, there's one difference, of course: Jesuit libraries. The libraries of Jesuit universities are much bigger. To compare it, Vilnius University Library owned in 1770 around 9,500 books. Königsberg University Library, 50 years older, owned not even half of that, exactly 4,492 books. And half of these 4,492 books were a donation of a professor 10 years ago, of David Blazek. Third, the municipality, or the city library. In every city in Europe, in every Protestant city at first, there was a library. That was a typical Lutheran idea. The city needs a library. And so these municipality or city libraries are concentrated on the collection of the city memorial, the urban memorial, and on the documents of the history of the city. In Königsberg, the city library was founded by Johannes Poliander, a priest, in 1541, with a collection of 1,000 books. In 1758, it has 5,000 books. Fourth, all in the time of Donelaitis, the library of the family of Wallenrod, the Wallenrod Library. The Wallenrod Library, some of you will know, it's for every historian of library and book science, it's a paradise. Yeah, it's unique. The Wallenrod Library was founded by the Chancellor of Eastern Prussia, Martin von Wallenrod, in 1623, and since 1650 it stood in one tower of cathedral in Kaliningrad. And it was the first, since 1650, it was the first public library in Königsberg. It was open to the public. That's the reason why the Russian administration wanted to have a catalog for this library too. Until 1909, this library was owned by the family of Wallenrod. Yeah? This Wallenrod library is a library rich with a collection on regional prints that are concentrated on persons. Yeah? Casualia, poetry, biographical literature, and so on. This Wallenrod library is the most famous nobility library in whole Eastern Prussia. And in 1758 it consists about, or it owns more than 5,200 books. And the fifth library and last library is the library of the Chancellery, or the German word is very, very hard to translate. Die Bibliothek der geheimen Etatskanzlei. The library of the secret state chancellery. Yeah? That means it's a small library that was used by the chancellery, by the administration, for their purposes. In 1758, this library consists of 863 books. But I would like to leave my theme for some seconds again. But this library is also a pearl. And here in Vilnius we have a wonderful and unique catalog in the library of the Academy of Sciences, yeah, about this library. It's a catalog that shows us year by year which book was coming in this library and who donated this book. The whole library was a library founded by gifts. If somebody get a new job, a new position in the Prussian state, he sent a book as thanks to this library. Yeah? This catalog is unique. We prepared that edition with this catalog because it shows us how the library developed and who participated in this special field of cultural communication. Yeah? We have a lot of scientific research about the book as a gift. Yeah? Natalie Simon Davis, for example. Yeah? This exchange policy. Yeah? So, that means, all in all,
there have been 5 public libraries in Königsberg that Donelaitis could have visited. But that's not all. That's not all. We have to imagine, first of all, that the public libraries are very, very poor. If there are big collections, they have problems to buy the current literature. They have no professional librarians. Yeah? To be a librarian was a secondary activity made by professors or other people. They were open just a few hours per week. Not everybody was allowed to go or to use them. So in every university city, there exists a lot of private libraries. Private libraries that were open to the students. Private libraries owns more current literature than public libraries. Private libraries have a function in the academic discourse of every city during early modern times. In every city, as I've said, there are existing a lot of private libraries. In Königsberg, during Donelaitis times, there have been a lot of these libraries, and their owners have between 2,000 and 3,000 books. Between 2,000 and 3,000 books. In 1732, for example, the book of Melchior Lübeck, the secretary of Königsberg municipality, was brought to sale. And the auction catalog, the catalog of the auction consists of 5,500 volumes, more than the other public libraries. And the biggest library that ever existed in Königsberg during the whole early modern period was a public library owned by a teacher of Donelaitis. Owned by this teacher of Donelaitis, who was the one who was having the longest time influence on Donelaitis, because this teacher became rector of the cathedral school in 1731, and then since 1733 he acted as professor of theology at Königsberg University. It was Daniel Saltenius. Saltenius died in 1750. And his library, he was 49 years old. His library consists of 22,000 books. That is more books than the whole public libraries of Königsberg owned. So, we can imagine Donelaitis as a reader. And we will have a chance to check if he really reads books in Königsberg, if we use these catalogs as a source. If we know a lot about the sources or the intertextual references in Donelaitis' poetical works. We know a lot about antique authors or contemporary authors. So if you prepare, for example, a list and check if these books were in Königsberg at the time of Donelaitis, maybe we can reconstruct the cosmos of his reading. It's an attempt, it can be an attempt that can start very, very soon, even here in Vilnius, because the library of the Academy of Science has another catalog, the catalog of the Königsberg University Library. And by the way, this catalog was written by the librarian of this university library, Friedrich Samuel Bock. And Friedrich Samuel Bock is more or less well known in the Donelaitis research, but known as Johann Georg Bock, who wrote the German Aesop. It was not Johann Georg Bock who wrote this Aesop, published in Königsberg 1742-43. It was Friedrich Samuel Bock, the librarian. As proof that he was the one is the catalogue in Vilnius, where he himself wrote his name as author. So, we can try to reconstruct the intellectual horizon of the readings of Donelaitis out of these catalogs. But, as I told you at the beginning, this attempt is fragmentary, and that's my last remark. It will not help us to understand everything, because the main influential books that we can mention of the current literature, that means Samuel Friedrich Spock's German Aesop and Brocke's Jahreszeit translation, are published in 1742, 43, and 1744. That means at a time when Donelaitis was far away from Königsberg in the province. But somehow he must have had the chance to get access to these books even in the province. We do not know how, but maybe he bought these books and then he owned it. That could be a possible explanation. Is a gentleman, Axel E,